This week on To the Contrary, first, the changing views of women and persons of color on gun ownership. Then, Vice President Kamala Harris takes on immigration. Welcome to the Contrary, a weekly discussion of news and social trends. After two mass shootings, Congress is once again considering new gun legislation, while gun shop owners are ready for a spike in sales. A firearms trade association, the National Shooting Sports Foundation, reports firearm sales to women are up 40% from 2019. African Americans as well as Asian Americans have also been buying guns at unprecedented rates. Surveys say the reasons range from personal safety to the fear of civil unrest. With us today, Hillary Rosen, Democratic strategist, Rena Shah, Republican strategist, Avis Jones-DeWeaver, co-founder Max Black Media, Tiana Lowe, columnist for the Washington Examiner. Let me start with you, Avis Jones-DeWeaver, as a very prominent African-American woman. Do you see views on gun rights and gun ownership changing among women you know?
To some degree among women. Specifically, though, I would say generally speaking, though, within the Black community, there is a strong segment that have always understood the need to be able to defend ourselves, and that would include through gun ownership.
Do they pay attention to the data that show that if you have a gun in your home, you're much more likely to use it for suicide than you are to fend off an intruder?
Perhaps, but when you come from a history of, quite frankly, experiencing domestic terrorism in this country, we see, at least I know I do, and a lot of people that I have grown up around have seen it as a very essential element for self-defense.
And it doesn't scare them that they get a firearm, and for every one that they get, 100 more go out on the street to people who are going to use it to burglarize them.
You know, I think what we're talking about here are people who are interested in owning a gun at home. If they have children, they can figure out ways to have it in a way in which it's locked away and it's safe. As a protective mechanism. To me, that's a very different discussion than what we generally see in terms of a lot of the terroristic activities that are going on with high capacity, basically war machines that are being used to commit mass murder.
So you're talking about automatic weapons, which were banned at one point, and it expired after the Clinton administration, and it's no Congress, no president's been able to get it back as a law since then. Hillary, you are a Democratic strategist. How does the Biden administration tricky track this issue? Because on the one hand, he wants to remain very centrist. That's how he won the election. On the other hand, the left are pushing him, parts of the left or most of the left are pushing for gun control because it's been gone for years, at least insofar as automatic weapons is concerned. And yet now this new part of the left, and you tell me how big it is saying, no, we want our own guns.
Look, I don't think we should take what Avis is saying as being that all of a sudden people of color and women are against universal background checks. That's not true. I mean, I think why should any segment of our population who wants to feel like a little, empowerment or something with owning a gun, that has absolutely nothing to do with the public policy issues facing the Congress and facing President Biden. And, we ought to pass the universal background checks bill that passed the House last week. The Senate ought to pass it. Biden will sign it. And that says, like, if you have a history, a criminal history, if you have a mental health history, you are not going to be able to buy a gun. And that's appropriate. That's what we want. And so I think this conflating, the NRA line that, well, we're going to be taking guns away from women and now people of color, if all of a sudden we do simple gun control, that is just, a red herring.
Right, but that was but that was going to be my next question, which is, Republicans and the NRA, I don't know how powerful the NRA is anymore. It pretty much imploded last year, but the NRA and all the pro-gun ownership PACs are going to run ads saying, showing Biden calling for registration, and then it's going to be followed by the typical Republican line, which is, and registration is just, what if you want to sell a gun to your friend? Should you have to register that sale? And of course, all the gun owners, or the majority of them.
I think Democrats have crossed that threshold. President Biden has crossed that threshold. He has a lot of experience from his time in the Judiciary Committee, and then, working with Barack Obama after these multiple mass shootings. I don't think we are going to get stuck in that old paradigm anymore that the NRA is trying to throw out there about, if you do this, then it's the next step to everybody taking away all your guns. I don't think
do you agree?
Fall for it.
So,
do you agree?
We forget that the overwhelming majority of gun violence in this country are domestic disputes and suicides. So the overwhelming majority of those are caused not with semi-automatics, not with rifles, but with handguns, with shotguns. And that's not the conversation that Biden is interested in having. And also, we're still seeing suicides skyrocket when it comes to other methods, when it comes especially to drugs. We've seen that skyrocket during the pandemic. So in order to change those effects, you need to focus more on domestic violence and focus more on mental health. With regards to domestic violence, something that I know that the right is amenable to is the idea of a gun violence restraining order, which would act similarly like a regular restraining order, but with firearms. Because fundamentally, these sweeping rules are antithetical to what the founders wanted. As great as I think it is to arm yourself for self-defense, the reason why we have a Second Amendment is that way we can be armed against a tyrannical government if and when that happens. It is not about self-defense. The self-defense argument is very important, especially when you think about prior to, the past 25 years, almost all gun regulations were specifically designed to marginalize Black Americans. Were specifically designed to keep them unarmed.
To keep them. I remember covering gun issue back as late as the 80s. There was never any talk of. I'm talking Jim Crow. I'm talking Jim Crow era guns. Yes, not the 80s. Okay. And I live in downtown DC, where the whole defund the police thing has been all the rage. I've been the victim of a stranger assault in DC. I know many friends who have been the victim of stranger assaults in DC. And yeah, I would feel a lot safer with a gun, but DC has left me unarmed. And Rena, you are a Republican strategist, also co-founder or founder of Women for Biden during the last presidential election cycle. If you were advising him, what would you tell him to do on gun control, if anything?
Well, I think this U.S. Senate is going to force his hand. We look at my home state, Senator Joe Manchin. I was born and raised in rural Appalachia where people love their guns, and responsible gun ownership was always a topic of conversation in some of the communities that I grew up in. I'm talking about when I went to church activities with friends. There was an understanding that people liked their guns. They had their guns for various reasons. Hunting was a big thing out there, but the reality was personal safety safety was also a really big deal. And so when I look at the situation, I want to talk about right now. And the right now is that it feels like nowhere is safe. When we look at Colorado recently, Colorado has really redefined how people look at gun violence in this country. When we think about Columbine and that school shooting, I was still in school during that time. And I just remember being blown away that could happen at school. Then we looked at Aurora, Colorado, and you see a movie theater where you feel like you're not even safe watching a movie. And now in a grocery store. And I know somebody that had connections to that officer and a special needs cashier or grocer that were killed. And the pain that these communities feel is so, we just can't define it. Unless you've gone through it, you have no clue. And I think right now with the sitting member of Congress, Congresswoman Lucy McBath of Georgia, I remember meeting her on Inauguration Day 2017, and she wasn't a congresswoman then. And I look at her and I think, here's a mother who lost her son to senseless violence. And that's what prompted her to come to public service. We should not have stories like hers.
And
but
she's not the first like that, by the way.
Absolutely not. She's not. But in this era, it reminds us how much a part of our life this has all become. And that I have cousins who live in other parts of the world who say, America has an obsession with guns, don't you all? And here's the thing, Bonnie, there are Republicans, there are people right of center who want to have a conversation about taking assault weapons away, weapons that are weapons of war.
Let me move on to the next topic,
sure.
Which within this topic, which is, and you can all jump in on each other, but if I jump in, everybody else stops talking. I'm just there to be the traffic cop. But do we really believe that there's always been some women and some people of color who had guns? Do we think that that percentage of the population is growing in this era? Anybody?
Yes, it's definitely growing. And, as I said, being the victims of domestic terrorism is not a new thing for African Americans. We have been at the brunt of domestic terrorist activity since we've been here. And
let me ask you, for African Americans, is that the main issue for voting?
That is a central issue, and it's a rising issue. I mean, everyone has seen that hate crimes have spiked in recent years. Under the Trump administration, we hit record heights in terms of the number of hate groups in America. Our children are being bullied based on race at higher levels when they were in school prior to the pandemic. People are getting bold in their racist rhetoric and violent activity. And so I think there are a lot of African Americans are saying that I need to be able to protect myself, protect my family, protect the people that I love. And if they are armed, then I need to be armed too.
Hillary.
And if I may, Avis, you bring up such a great point, because on January 6th,
Asians too, obviously, anti-Asian violence in the past week.
Yes.
Well, and there's a reason why Koreans on rooftops during the Rodney King riots were a thing, because the police weren't there to protect them. So they took matters into their own hand. And as an Asian American woman, if we have a push for more Asian Americans to arm themselves, I am all for it.
Yeah, we need to feel safe in our communities. And when you don't feel safe, you think, well, what's my option? And on January 6th, I was faced with that option. I actually had friends texting me when I was on the rooftop on Capitol Hill of 101 Constitution Avenue, asking me if I was carrying that day. And I wasn't. And I was in DC for media. And I looked out at that sea of folks who were part of the rally, obviously, to go to the Capitol, provoked by President Trump. But then there were obviously insurrectionists there who did take on the Capitol and took it under siege. But I looked out and I'm thinking to myself, that's a sea of largely white. What's going on out there? Are there white supremacists out there?
Let me ask you this, Rena and Tiana and Avis, and then Hillary, I want you jumping in too. But for the women of color on this panel, do any of you own a weapon? And if so, is it more to defend yourself against sexual assault as a woman, so to speak, or against racial violence, against race-based violence? Nobody?
I mean, so in DC, I live in DC proper. It is very, very hard to not only own a firearm, but also to get a concealed carry license. So, it doesn't necessarily, and believe me, I'm now actually looking to try that. I am what they say is white passing. So I've never really gotten the racism element of it with stranger crime. Oh, but yeah, no, but with the sexual element, absolutely. Considering I have been assaulted in broad daylight in DC and there were no cops around to do anything. So absolutely, that is why I want a gun. I would have shot the guy who did that to me with no compunction. That's why the Breonna Taylor crisis was a gun rights issue. Absolutely. It was as much police malpractice and just gross intrusion of civil rights and civil liberties as it was a gun owners and a gun rights issue.
Absolutely. And I will just say, even beyond the Jim Crow era, when you look at, for example, the Black Panther Party, which is much more recent, that was the last time you had automatic weapon bans. When you had a group of Black people who were arming themselves for protection. And so we can ban weapons in this country. We've done it in the past. It's interesting to me that there seems to be a hesitancy to ban weapons when it's white people that are wielding it.
And I've owned a handgun before, and I took it out of my house when I had my first child, because my husband and I had a discussion. We were very worried about that. He's a physician. We've seen the stats about children and guns, and he did not feel comfortable with me having it. I had it as a single woman. Like I said, I hail from West Virginia. I lived in DC for a while. Tiana brings up great issues out there. But then when we had property in Virginia, I felt like that was something I needed to do. I had been groped in Philadelphia during dusk, and that shook me. And I thought, if I had a gun, I would have shot that guy in the foot or in the leg. I definitely wouldn't shoot to kill. It's just not who I am as a person. But I mean, in a moment, you want to do everything you can to protect yourself. So a handgun, to me, was responsible. But with very young children in the home, I've been very nervous about that.
Okay, and Hillary, last question on this topic. Do you think we're going to be able to? Do you think that the White House and Congress are going to pass and approve anything?
I think there's a significant determination to at least get background checks. And I hate this idea that we think that we are so given up on the system that the only way we can protect people against, racist police is to, start our own army. We have to deal with racist systemic racist police departments and aggressive crime that way. And it statistically, forget about, how awful the Breonna Taylor issue was. And I agree, if she had a gun and shot that police officer, I'd be the first one defending her. But statistically, people who own guns are more likely to be a victim of gun violence, often with their own gun. That's just a statistic. And people of color right now are more likely to be a victim of handgun violence. And so, figuring out how to get everybody more guns, I don't think is really the long-term solution.
But I have one more question, and then I got to jump. Are there so many guns out there now that gun control is a ridiculous concept? I sometimes think that to myself. I mean, how many millennia would it take?
Well, it's pretty hard right now to regulate it with any kind of certainty, but you have to start somewhere. And 22 states have already implemented some form of gun control, and actually violent crime in those states has been reduced. And so there is data even in this own country for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
and I don't think we're again
the people of color and guns to immigration. Vice President Kamala Harris will lead the politically risky job of responding to the surge of immigrants, many of them unaccompanied children at the U.S. southern border. President Biden made the announcement saying he can think of nobody better qualified to do the job. Harris won't be in charge of all immigration issues. The focus will be the immediate problem at the border and long-term diplomatic efforts with Mexico and Central America, where the migrants are coming from. Rena, do you think that President Biden assigned this task to Vice President Kamala Harris because it's going to be so darn difficult to fix?
I think who better to assign the task to than the daughter of two immigrants. And I think she is somebody
she was not where we're having a problem now is on the southern border, not on people coming over from Asia.
Of course, but her father came over from Jamaica, if I'm correct on that, and her mother from India. But look, I'm the daughter of immigrants from Uganda and India, and those of us who have parents who immigrated here legally by the letter of the law, who spent a lot of money to do so, we do take issue for those who want to jump the line. But look, what's happening at the southern border right now, the moment we're in, the political moment, has made folks question: are people coming here with reasonable requests for asylum? Like, what do these migrants really want? Are they coming under the guise of asylum? What I'm hearing from the right, a lot of it, is that these people are all lying. They say they're fleeing dangerous situations. No, they're just coming here to have the better way of American life. And that's the debate right now. So again, I think whether, you're like myself and Vice President Harris, who have parents of that ilk, you still understand that this immigration system is so broken, and what we need is comprehensive immigration reform. And look, the reality is it's going to be messy, but nobody's tackled it.
What comprehensive immigration reform has meant since the 1980s, when Simpson-Mazzoli was approved and they gave amnesty to 3 million people in the country here illegally, it's now 11 million. It just means let in everybody who cheated the system and came in here illegally, and let's start over again. And of course, you're going to get more people. That's an invitation. Please come in here illegally.
No, we have to start somewhere, Bonnie. If it means resetting somehow, we need to have that conversation, but we're not even having the conversation. And the reality is, the one big problem here is visa overstays. And nobody really wants to speak about kind of how we get to this problem, quote unquote, illegal aliens, illegal immigrants, that kind of thing. It's a lot of it is these facts and data that do mean visa overstays are a problem. Why are we not talking about that?
So what are the inside White House thoughts? Why pick VP Harris for this assignment?
Let's just be clear on what she is and isn't assigned to do right now. So Rin just raised a question about enforcement. She's not going to be addressing the enforcement of the border as we have it now. That is still the Department of Homeland Security. She's not going to be addressing facilities, et cetera. What is a challenge right now is the economic prosperity, the corruption, the governance, the civil society in the countries where we are seeing the most migration right now. So her job from the president is to be a diplomat and trying to help Mexico and the Northern Triangle nations of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras to stem that migration to that southern border. And that's going to be, how do you address the issues and help those countries address the issues that have created this migration problem?
Included in that list of duties she has, the surge. Some people are saying there is no surge of people coming across the border illegally. More people say that there is a surge. Isn't that?
May I jump in here for a second?
Yeah.
So Trump used diplomacy, not a wall, to end his 2019 crisis. And what he did was he had safe third country agreements with the Northern Triangle nations, and he cracked down on Mexico in making them enforce their own southern border. And here's why. Because under EU law, South American law, we do not say that a refugee can shop for which nation they want to choose asylum in. If you are an ethnic Mayan escaping the history of genocide in Guatemala, you have a legitimate asylum claim. However, you can't just say, I want to go to America because it's better than Mexico. Because once you land in Mexico, you can apply for asylum there. And as an ethnic Mayan, you are no longer under the risk of genocide. We do not take in economic migrants. That is not what our asylum system is for. If that's the case, you have to go in the back of the line with everyone else. And so the first thing Biden did was reverse those diplomatic orders via executive order, and then immediately removed all of the incentives that were keeping people away from coming up. And that's what's creating the surge. So now we have this surge again, where we're having February alone, over 100,000 border encounters. And then from there, here's the thing. We're
about out of time, and I want to give. I do want to bring Avis in for a last.
Biden didn't do that. Go ahead.
Your thoughts on whether whether just an impossible job was given to Kamala Harris, the way frequently women CEOs are only allowed to take over companies that are failing.
Absolutely. I think this was get the Black woman to clean up everybody else's mess. I mean, honestly, that's what this was. This is a no-win situation politically. So we can get into the details of what did and did not happen in the Trump administration, especially with regards to the cruelty and human rights violations that occurred with children and families. But let's just be real about this specific situation. She will be receiving heavy criticism from the right. She will be receiving heavy criticism from the left. And I wonder if this was some advising bodies around President Biden that maybe wanted to put her in a situation to undermine any future presidential aspirations.
All right. Hillary, 1 or 2 sentences. You agree or disagree?
Well, she was wholly on board with doing this because she has played an increasing role in foreign policy conversations and wanted to do this. But I totally agree with Avis that she's going to be attacked and we have to have her back.
All right, that's it for this edition. Thank you for joining us. Please follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Please visit our PBS website, www.tothecontrary.org. And whether you agree or think to the contrary. See you next week.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Colcom Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation. For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/To the Contrary.
Be more PBS.